Look, the European leaders here meeting was supposed to talk about competitivity or migration, but of course the events at the weekend in Russia and that Wagner mutiny putting Ukraine and defense back at the top of the agenda. That's essentially what the leaders have been talking about yesterday, trying to take stock of the events to understand what happened and what it meant, of course, for the war in Ukraine. And in a sense, the key message that we heard from the leaders is that, look, the events of the weekend showed that there were cracks on the Russian side and that here the unity on the European side was strong, and that the EU countries were standing strong on supporting Ukraine military, on the humanitarian point of view or from an economic point of view. And that was, in a sense, the message that I had from the Estonia Prime Minister, Mrs. Kallas, yesterday.
What is clear that Russia has played on us getting tired first, so we will see cracks in our unity, but actually it hasn't happened. We see cracks on their side. So what we have to do is to keep the pressure on Russia. Economical pressure by the sanctions, military pressure that we are giving the aid to Ukraine and they are defending themselves, and then of course political pressure that we can also have on different levels in the international institutions.
So, as you mentioned, President Zelensky addressed the European leaders yesterday via video link, asking for more sanctions. Remember, the EU voted the 11th package of sanctions last week and said we need to keep the pressure on Russia with more sanctions to come. We also heard from the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, who is taking over the EU rotating presidency from tomorrow. They will be heading to Kyiv straight away tomorrow, on the very first day of that presidency, to meet with President Zelensky again here to show the commitment of the EU towards Ukraine. So, another interesting note, as you mentioned in the introduction, how the text published yesterday, the European leaders said they will commit to future security commitments. There was a bit of a controversy around that. France put that on the table, and there's a question about what that means going forward. They said they will work towards putting these future security commitments on the table. So that could mean a fund, potentially, to fund some training of Ukrainian soldiers and also some new and more modern weapons for Ukraine. So they will discuss it. But certainly that was introduced in the text. Also talking about Belarus, we heard from the Lithuanian Prime Minister talking about what that means, having those Wagner troops on their border, on the border country of Belarus. So they're taking stock of all this yesterday. Now, interestingly, today, one of the topics of conversation will be China and the question of de-risking the relationship with that country. The last week, the Commission presented the economic security strategy. Of course, that paper didn't talk about China specifically, but it talked about the word de-risking. And of course, we know that this word has been floating around a lot when talking about the relationship with China. So that could be a difficult topic, of course, because we know all the European countries have very different view of what it means. Remember the Chinese premier being in Germany just last week, signing some contracts. So that would be a difficult conversation there for the European countries. But certainly from what we heard, including from the Latvian Prime Minister speaking to us yesterday, is that one thing that the EU countries need to do is learn the lessons from the war in Ukraine. Having the bloc over-reliant on another power like Russia for energy is kind of the same with manufacturing supply chain with China. So they need to learn this lesson and try to de-risk the supply chain. So they have to work on this. Finally, we had a chance to catch up also with the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, when we talked about the security situation in Europe. Of course, this meeting here being just 10 days before that all-important NATO summit in Vilnius, and asking whether the event at the weekend meant that the European members and NATO allies were adjusting their help to Ukraine.
Yeah, together with the European Union, NATO allies have provided unprecedented support, and we are stepping up. Just over the last weeks, we have seen new announcements from EU, but also from NATO allies, of additional support, and also the training of the F-16 pilots have started.
What we have seen during the last weekend is in contrast with the very strong EU unity and NATO EU unity. This is a very important point. Additional element, I have the occasion is today to meet with the opposition leadership in Belarus. We are also following closely what's happening in this country.
That was Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, and Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, speaking to me yesterday. Again, those European leaders try to take stock of those events at the weekend in Russia and that Wagner mutiny, what it means for the war in Ukraine, and also that conversation today on China. Of course, we know that the US is taking a tougher line on what the new relationship, the de-risking relation with China should be. So that would be the conversation today by the European leaders. Guys.
Hi, I'm Joanna Bersecci, and thank you for watching. You can check out more of our videos by clicking on the boxes on the screen. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more from CNBC International. Thank you for watching.